Hong Kong Golden Harvest Studios, May 1973, 2:15 p.m. The air inside the studio was a thick, stagnant soup. It was a cocktail of humidity, stale tobacco smoke, and that sharp, metallic ozone smell you only get when massive studio lights have been burning for 12 hours straight. We were deep in the guts of the underground cavern set for Enter the Dragon. If you've seen the movie, you know the place. The jagged rock walls, the low ceilings, the feeling of being trapped. On that Tuesday, the feeling wasn't just on the film, it was in the room. The cameras were being reloaded. In the world of high-stakes production, that's supposed to be a dead period. It's the few minutes where the hierarchy of the crew is most visible. The stars retreat to their chairs, the grips move heavy equipment, and the extras, the hundreds of local men hired for a few dollars a day, just try to stay out of the way. They are the background noise of cinema, meant to be seen but never heard. On this set, one rule was absolute. Bruce was the master, but the hierarchy of the crew was untouchable. You didn't cross the senior staff. You didn't question the men who ran the floor. And then a single sound cut through the low chatter of 100 tired men. It wasn't a shout. It was a sharp, wet slap. A sound so sudden it made the hair on my neck stand up. I've spent 30 years on international film sets. I've seen egos collide in 3 different continents. I was the unit production manager, the man paid to see everything and report nothing. My job was to keep the machine moving, no matter who got crushed in the gears. But what I saw in that cavern was a breach of protocol so severe that the Warner Brothers executives would later spend weeks trying to scrub it from the daily logs. They didn't want the world to know how close their multi-million-dollar investment came to a total collapse. It started with a young extra. He couldn't have been more than 20, skinny, his ribs showing through the grime of his costume. He had made a minor footwork error during a rehearsal, a stumble that delayed a shot by maybe 3 seconds. Standing over him was the senior stunt coordinator, a man we'll call the Titan. He was a 220-pound expatriate, a wall of muscle who had built a reputation on breaking in the local talent. He belonged to an old-school industry that believed those at the bottom of the call sheet didn't deserve dignity. They deserved to be intimidated into perfection. The Titan didn't just correct the boy, he humiliated him. He struck him across the face with enough force to send him sprawling into the dirt. The extra didn't fight back. He just sat there, clutching his jaw, looking at the floor. The rest of the crew went silent. We all saw it. The American producers looked at their clipboards. The director looked at the monitors. In the logic of a 1970s film set, this was just business. You don't stop $1 million-a-day machine for a nameless face. But then, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bruce Lee had been sitting in the shadows, draped in a robe, conserving his energy for the next sequence. He was the smallest man in the immediate circle, barely 145 pounds. But when he stood up, the space around him seemed to contract. He didn't scream. He didn't rush over. He simply walked into the center of the frame, moving with a terrifying, measured focus. He walked past the producers, past the director, and stopped directly in front of the Titan. For a few seconds, no one breathed. You have to understand the stakes here. Bruce wasn't just the star, he was the reason this movie existed. If he got injured, the production was dead. If he caused a legal nightmare by attacking a senior staff member, the studio would pull the plug. The Titan knew this. He stood his ground, towering over Bruce, a smirk playing on his lips that said, "You're a movie star, not a real threat." Bruce looked at the extra, then back at the giant standing over him. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried to the very back of the cavern. He told the coordinator that if the boy's mistake was so offensive, if it was so worthy of a strike, then the coordinator should be prepared to show everyone how it's done. But not for the cameras. "Show me," Bruce said. "Full contact." The producers stepped forward, their voices hushed and panicked. They were talking about insurance, about schedules, about the risk of a broken hand. Bruce ignored them. He wasn't looking at the money. He was looking at the moral compass of his set, which had just been smashed. He issued a challenge that felt like a trap, a set of rules that sounded impossible. One exchange, no closed fists, no pads, no moving feet. Bruce told the Titan he wouldn't even shift his stance. He would stand perfectly still and allow the 220-pound man to come at him. It was a test of pure reflex against raw power. The coordinator laughed. To him, this was a gift. He was a trained fighter with 70 pounds on Bruce. He assumed the little dragon was just a choreographed actor who had started believing his own press. The crew formed a silent circle, a makeshift tribunal in the dirt of the cavern. The script supervisor sat there with a stopwatch, her knuckles white. This was the point of no return. The Titan stepped into a heavy boxing stance, his shoulders bunching, his eyes locked on Bruce's chin. He was going to end the legend right here, in the dark, where the cameras couldn't save him. The air in the studio felt different now. It wasn't just the heat, it was the weight of what was about to happen. Bruce stood there, his hands open, his body completely relaxed. He looked like a man waiting for a bus, not a man about to face a charging bull. The Titan lunged. He didn't lead with a jab. He threw his entire weight into a wide, punishing hook. It was a kill shot, meant to put Bruce on the floor and end the argument. I've seen professional heavyweights move, but this was different. It was a man fueled by ego and the need to prove he was the alpha. What happened next is where the legend separates from the truth. If you ask 10 people who were in that room, you'll get 10 slightly different versions, but the mechanics remain the same. As the Titan's fist traveled through the air, Bruce didn't dodge. He didn't lean back. He simply entered the space that the Titan had just vacated. It was a stop hit, the core principle of Jeet Kune Do. Bruce's hand moved so fast that it didn't look like a strike. It looked like a flicker of light. There was a sound, a sharp pop of skin on skin. The coordinator's head snapped back with a violence that made the producers gasp. His feet didn't move, but his upper body was whipped backward as if he'd been hit by a swinging lead pipe. He hadn't even finished his punch. His fist was still 18 inches from Bruce's face when his own head hit the limit of his neck's rotation. Bruce's hand was already back in its starting position, open and relaxed. The invisible lead had landed before the coordinator's brain could even register that the fight had started. The Titan stumbled back, his eyes glazed, a look of pure, unadulterated shock crossing his face. He touched his jaw, the same spot where he had struck the extra moments before. The room went cold. No one moved a muscle. The script supervisor looked at her stopwatch. It hadn't even been a full second. But the Titan's ego was bigger than his wisdom. He regained his footing, his face turning a deep bruised purple. He realized he had been embarrassed in front of the people he bullied. He didn't bow. He didn't apologize. Instead, he did something that almost ended the most important martial arts film in history before it was finished. He decided that Bruce had gotten lucky. He decided that if he couldn't outbox the star, he would use his size to crush him. He lowered his head, let out a guttural growl, and charged with the full force of a 220-pound man looking to tackle a target into the stone walls. And that was just the beginning of the end for the Titan. The Titan didn't just run. He threw his entire life into that tackle. 220 pounds of bone and muscle, fueled by a bruised ego, coming at a man who barely tipped the scales at 145. It was a freight train aiming for a glass house. From my vantage point near the script supervisor's desk, it looked like the end of the production. I could already see the headlines. Martial arts star hospitalized in on-set brawl. The American producers were frozen, their mouths open, probably calculating the cost of a 6-month delay in their heads. But the thing about Bruce was that he never reacted to the noise. He only reacted to the energy. As the coordinator closed the distance, Bruce didn't step back to create space. He didn't try to outrun the momentum. He did the one thing that defies every natural instinct of a smaller man. He dropped his center of gravity and stepped into the collision. In the trade, we call it sinking. He became a mountain, immovable and rooted. The coordinator's arms were wide, reaching for Bruce's waist, looking to lift him and drive him into the jagged rock walls of the set. But he never got the chance to close his grip. Bruce's right hand was already positioned near the center of the Titan's chest. It didn't look like a punch. There was no wind-up, no dramatic swing of the shoulder. It was a short-range burst of energy, delivered from less than 3 inches away. It was the inch punch in its purest, most violent form. The sound was like a heavy rug being beaten against a stone floor. A dull, sickening thud that vibrated through the floorboards of the cavern set. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to warp. The coordinator's forward momentum stopped dead, as if he had run into a steel beam hidden behind a curtain. Then, the physics shifted. The giant didn't just fall. He was launched. His feet actually left the dirt, and he was propelled backward 5 feet, crashing into a stack of wooden prop crates. The wood splintered like matchsticks, and the sound of the impact echoed off the low ceilings for what felt like an eternity. Then came the silence. It was a silence so heavy, it felt like it had physical weight. Nobody moved. Not the grips, not the cameramen, not the terrified producers. Even the dust in the air seemed to hang still in the spotlight. The Titan lay among the broken crates, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a realization that went deeper than pain. He wasn't just beaten, he was dismantled. His entire belief system about size, power, and authority had been shattered in less than 3 seconds. Bruce didn't follow up. He didn't hover over the man or shout insults. He just stood there, his hands returning to his sides, his breathing as calm as if he had been sitting in a garden. He looked over at the young extra, the boy who had been slapped into the dirt, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a gesture of victory. It was a gesture of restoration. He was telling the boy that his dignity was back in place. Then Bruce turned his gaze to the producers. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. This set is mine, and on my set we respect the people who do the work. Slowly, painfully, the Titan began to crawl out of the wreckage of the crates. His face was a mask of confusion and shame. He looked at Bruce, and for a moment I thought he might try something else, but then he did something that none of us expected. He didn't reach for a weapon or a lawyer. He stood up, wiped the dust from his shirt, and he bowed. It wasn't a movie bow. It was the bow of a man who had just seen the truth and had no choice but to acknowledge it. But the drama didn't end when the breathing slowed down. Within 20 minutes, the studio brass were in a frenzy. You have to understand the climate of 1973. Warner Brothers was betting everything on Enter the Dragon. It was the first major co-production between East and West. If the story leaked that their star was engaging in unscripted combat, or worse, that he had physically assaulted a senior staff member, the insurance companies would have pulled the plug. The legal teams would have descended like vultures. The sin of that afternoon had to be buried. The daily logs were edited. The incident was scrubbed from the official production notes. The script supervisor was told to forget the stopwatch reading. The 40 or so witnesses were given a silent, stern understanding. What happens in the cavern stays in the cavern. In the world of Hong Kong cinema, saving face is a currency more valuable than gold. For the senior stunt lead to be publicly humiliated by a younger actor was a breach of social harmony that the industry couldn't officially acknowledge. So we all took part in a collective forgetting. We finished the day's shoot. We moved on to the next scene. But the power dynamic of the set had changed forever. For the rest of the production, the extras were treated with a level of professionalism that I hadn't seen in 20 years of film work. The bullying stopped. The atmosphere shifted from one of fear to one of collective purpose. Bruce had recalibrated the moral compass of the entire machine with one single invisible strike. People often ask me why there's no footage of this. They want to see the lost tape of Bruce Lee's greatest fight. But the truth is, the cameras were being reloaded. The celluloid wasn't rolling. And in a way, that's exactly how Bruce wanted it. He wasn't performing for the world. He was performing for the people in that room. He was teaching a lesson that didn't need a widescreen release to be effective. Years later, after Bruce was gone and the movie had become a global phenomenon, I'd see some of those same crew members in the bars in Kowloon. We wouldn't talk about the fight scenes you see in the film, the mirrors, the claws, the underground brawls. We'd talk about the afternoon in May when the lights were low and the air was thick. We'd talk about the man who proved that power without character is just noise. The world remembers Bruce Lee for his speed, his charisma, and his films. But those of us who were in the cavern remember him for something else. We remember the moment he risked everything for a kid whose name wasn't even on the call sheet. He showed us that true mastery isn't just about how hard you can hit. It's about knowing when the hit is necessary to protect the weak. He taught us that the greatest strike ever landed on a film set is the one that never makes it to the screen. The producers got their movie, the world got its legend. But that young extra, he got his life back. And as for the Titan, he never bullied another soul as long as he worked in the industry. He had learned the hard way that when the ego meets reality, the ego always breaks first. The world may doubt the stories. Without video, without records, it all sounds like a myth. But I was there. I saw the crate splinter, I saw the giant fly, and I know that some truths are too big for a camera lens to capture. Some legends are real, and they usually happen when the world isn't looking.